Dear young adults, Om Shri Sai Ram. Welcome to the December workshop for the Sathya Sai Young Adult Talent Development Program 2018. Before we kickstart today's workshop, let's start with 3 Oms. In our previous YATD workshop, we learned 3 practical tips on how to make wise decisions in times of uncertainty. These practical tips included: number 1, reframing uncertainty. Everything in life is uncertain, and being unsure makes you search for better choices. Number 2, use your intellect. When making a decision, weigh the clarity of the decision with associated risk. Use the SAI principle: Swami first, all others next, and myself last. Surrender. Uncertainty bothers us when we are disconnected from our higher selves or God. If you did not manage to participate in the last workshop but would like to know more about it, the recording is now available on YouTube. Please visit the official SSIO profile to find a playlist of all the YATD workshops to date. Today's session will be facilitated by Brother Sudhagar Sivabalan of Australia. Within the Sathya Sai International Organization, Brother Sudhagar currently serves as the National Young Adult Coordinator for Australia. Previously, he has also served in a number of roles for the SSIO, including as a Central Young Adult Coordinator, Regional Young Adult Coordinator, and Regional Bhajan Coordinator. Professionally, Brother Sudhagar used to be an accountant, and after a career change, he is now practicing as a dentist. Brother Sudhagar, the floor is all yours.
And thank you so much for that introduction. You can hear me clearly? You can hear me? All right, awesome. So Saram, everyone. Thank you so much for joining the call today. First, Saram and my love to all of you all individually across the whole world. Before we start, I'd like to ask Swami to please bless this instrument with the strength to speak with purpose and reflect his teachings the best that it can. So communication is such an important asset for all of us in our lives. We are using it all the time, and having the confidence to communicate is really valuable. We communicate in so many ways, and one of the most obvious ways we communicate is with our speech. So to kick off today's session, what better way than hearing what Swami has to say about the importance of communication, especially communication with the tongue. So Swami has said, among the sense organs, the most important one is the mouth or tongue, with the power of speech. If one can conquer the tongue, he will be the master of all the senses. So extending from this, we can see that Swami places so much emphasis on the tongue, on the power of our speech, and flowing on from that, the idea of communication. If we can conquer the tongue, we will be the master of all the senses. So something to keep in mind for the rest of this workshop. So let's get into it and look at the objectives for today's workshop. So we have 4 objectives today. The first is explore what the barriers to communication are and how we can manage them. The second is to explore how self-aware we are of our communication styles and how we actually communicate. Next is to discuss the desired and undesired outcomes of communication. And finally, to contemplate on who we are in fact communicating with. So we are constantly communicating, like I was saying, in our life. And as SSI individuals, as anyone in a work environment, studying, family, we sometimes need to communicate in easy and difficult situations. We communicate when we're giving and receiving feedback. Brother Satish did an awesome session a little while ago on giving and receiving feedback. We communicate, say, when we want to order food. If we want something done at home, if we have children, we want to communicate something. We are constantly communicating. And in some situations, it's really easy. You don't even think twice. But in other situations where it's very difficult, then you really think, how am I going to communicate this? And we are communicating to lots and lots of people, and we need to think, how will they feel when we communicate with them? So the first question that I have for everyone to kick off today is, who are some of the stakeholders or people that we communicate with in our lives? Please feel free to post in the chat box. Like I was saying, we communicate with lots of people, whether it be at work, at home, in the SSIO organization. And if you feel free to post in the chat box anyone that you think that you communicate with. Yeah, so we have family, friends, colleagues. Yeah, colleagues at work, so lots of working people. Work, family, friends, yeah. Cool. So, I mean, basically a pretty consistent thing. Manager, SSI, family. So there are so many people. Yeah, if you're a student, you're studying, you're communicating with your lecturers, relatives. Yeah, thanks so much, everyone, for sharing those thoughts. So in my own life, I thought we'd start look at a scenario of someone that I had to communicate with. So thanks for sharing. So employees, SSI Center members. So initially I was an accountant. So I used to be an accountant, and I was hoping to get out of accounting and try a career change. I was working as an intern, and at the time, the partners or the managers in the firm were having meetings with all the interns saying, it's time to progress with the further 2 years of study, so doing your chartered accountant exams to become a chartered accountant, in addition to exploring different roles and the progress in the firm. So where we sort of saw ourselves in the next 6 months, 1 year, 2 years. But in my heart, I didn't want to do the CA or the Chartered Accountant exams because I knew I was going to leave the firm soon and change career paths. But I hadn't told anyone at work yet. So my intern meeting was going to happen the next day, and for some reason I became really worried about how to communicate this to my managing partner. So again, I'd like to stop now and ask everyone if you've ever been in a similar situation, whether it's at work, with friends, at home, in the SSIO organization. When you need to say something, like saying no or giving feedback, why do we become like this? What stops us from communicating? So again, feel free to post in the chat box. We're communicating with lots of people. Sometimes it's easy, sometimes it's harder, but what's actually stopping us from communicating? Awesome, yeah. Fear of judgment, yeah. Rejection, yeah. Our doubts, anger, yeah, awesome. So sometimes anger, agitation, fear of the outcome, yeah. Lack of confidence, fear of things not working out how we plan. So sort of undue assumptions, confrontation. Yeah, so awesome responses. So things like not having the words to communicate, fear of judgment, don't have the means to communicate. So you really want to tell someone in person, but hey, they're too far, or the next time you're going to meet them, it's not the best opportunity. So do you do it via email? Do you do it via text? You feel intimidated by the other people. And also undue assumptions. What are they going to think? Yes, whether it's a secret, so you can't actually tell anyone else. So thank you so much, everyone, again, for sharing. So a similar thing happened for me in this work situation with the accountant. So lots of thoughts started swirling around in my head. Like, if I tell them that I don't want to do my CA, they'll want to fire me, or they'll give me all the boring clients. The staff will become cold to me. I didn't know what to tell the partner or the manager. I was just stuck because all of these things were just going in my head, monkey mind, going. And inherently at the root of this, the word fear kept coming up. There is some sort of fear that stops us from communicating confidently. So if we were to drill into this a little bit more, this idea of fear, why do you think we are afraid to communicate? So you can feel free to post in the chat box, but I've got a few responses here from a bit of research. So we are afraid to communicate because sometimes our thoughts are based on assumptions. So we're afraid of what that person's reaction is going to be. We assume what the outcome is potentially going to be after we communicate. We don't have the confidence to articulate what we are actually thinking. And if we were in my situation as an accountant, I was worried that they were going to give me boring clients, but did I actually know that? Did I know that the staff were going to become cold to me? There's this fear of judgment that's really there as well. And if we drill deeper and deeper, that idea of body attachment. So we've asked why we're afraid to communicate. So who better to ask than Swami? So let's see what Swami says about fear. Swami says, when you forget yourself, when you forget the Atma, you will suffer from fear. When you remember only the world and not God, you will suffer from fear. When you are filled with desires and attachments, you will suffer from fear. When you are deluded by objects, you will suffer from fear. So our minds are constantly swimming in Maya with all these thoughts and complexities, but maybe we just need to simplify it. Be a little bit more objective about our thoughts so that we can actually communicate confidently and not worry, not be fearful of what the outcome is. And in a bodily sense, we might ask, what do we actually have control over? So people are responding with different things like fear of judgment, assumptions, things like that. But do we actually have control over those things? We can say ultimately it's all His will, and definitely that's true. But as long as we believe that we are this body, let's play the game. After all, Swami has said life is a game, play it. So let's just go along for the ride. Let's look at this idea of what we actually have control over when we communicate. So in this image, the next image, we've got it defined as two parts. We have me. So what do I have control over? We have what I have and what's not me. So if we look at me, we have control over what I'm actually communicating, what I'm saying, how I'm communicating it. So am I very assertive? Am I a little bit meek or not confident in saying it? Am I saying with anger, and am I saying it with frustration? How am I feeling when I'm actually communicating? Is my heart racing? Am I sweating? Am I feeling warm? Is my mouth getting dry, a bit choked up? And what is the situation I'm actually communicating it in? Is it a situation that's already quite heated? Or is it a situation that's actually founded on love and respect? Are we able to wait for that situation? And these are the things that we might have control over. The things that we don't have control over, though, are what the other person is hearing. How will they respond? What will they think of me? Without doubt, it's so important to think of these things, which we don't necessarily have control over, so that we can actually effectively communicate. Because if you think that they're going to get angry from what you're saying or how you're saying it, then definitely you should try to change it. Because maybe you're not coming from a place of love. But if you really feel that what you're going to communicate, how you're communicating, you are really thought, word, and deed, everything is pure and all in alignment, what they're going to feel, you have no control over. So how can we actually cultivate the confidence to communicate when we already discussed all the things that are stopping us, why we're afraid, understanding what we actually have control over and what we don't have control over? A really handy tool to cultivate this confidence is actually to be aware of these things that we have control over. Having awareness is such an important tool to build confidence. So let's move on to the next objective, which was becoming self-aware of what we have, what our strengths are. Like what Brother Alvin spoken about in the previous YATD, what you might see as your uniqueness and how you make them as your strength. So we're going to look at knowing what your communication style is. We're going to assess how assertive we are when we communicate, and looking at the idea of having an open and clear mind when we are communicating. So becoming a lot more aware of how we communicate so we're confident in how we communicate. So we'll go to the next slide. So first, knowing what your communication style is. So there's one model here that defines different people in their communication styles. You might be a driver where you're very assertive, really direct, structured in everything you think. You might be analytical, so you think really, really hard, like to get a lot of information before making any decisions or communicating. You might be quite expressive, a real ideas person, got lots and lots of ideas, but not quite there to execute or be too assertive. And then finally, maybe you might be amiable, where you're all about rapport building, prefer to really build a relationship before making any decision. So as I'm saying this, you might be thinking, oh, what am I? Am I really assertive, or am I quite expressive? We can't necessarily pigeonhole ourselves into any single one individually, but without doubt, there's a part of us that's probably more one of them than the other. And that's really important to reflect on as well, because there are many, many different styles. Say I'm a driver, but I'm talking to someone who's quite amiable. How do I bridge these communication styles so that I can effectively communicate? This is where I'd like to ask another question. What do you think your communication style is? Only if you're comfortable to share. What do you think you fall into more? Are you quite the driver, very assertive? Or are you more expressive, real like ideas person, got lots of ideas but sort of struggle to communicate them? Or more amiable, where you really, yeah, awesome. So amiable, really like to build some rapport, prefers a lot of relationship building. Analytical, yeah. So really, really think hard before making any decisions and before communicating. Combinations, yeah, awesome. So as you can see, even just within this chat, we have so many different styles of communication. And being really comfortable and aware in your style of communication is so important. Ultimately, though, Swami has said there is one language, the language of the heart, communication of the heart. And underlying all of these models and words, driver, analytical, all this, do we really believe that there's only one language, the language of the heart, for us to communicate? Again, something to just think about with the awareness of how we communicate. So we've discussed our different communication styles. Thank you everyone for sharing once again. And like I said, try to be as aware as possible of your individual style. Now we're going to move on to another aspect of being aware of how we communicate. So this model is called the Degraded Assertiveness model, which is sometimes used in the health space. So for anyone who's heard about it, hopefully we've got the same interpretation of it. But one of the interpretations of the Degraded Assertiveness model is to break it up into PACE, or P-A-C-E. You might think, what does the Degraded Assertiveness model actually mean? So when you communicate, or when we communicate, we might say things to try to get to an outcome in a few different ways, in a few different a level of assertiveness. So you might probe, where you might just ask a question to tease it out of them. You might alert them to it, so a little bit more assertive, but just bringing up that awareness again of that person or what you're trying to communicate. If they're still not quite getting it, you have to become a bit more assertive, so you might challenge them. So you say, no, I don't think that's right. And if they're still not getting it, you might actually escalate it, or it might be what's called emergency, where you have to be extremely, extremely assertive. But as you can imagine, if you go into a situation being too assertive, there's an extremely high risk that it could go pear-shaped really, really quickly. So it's really important to be aware of how assertive we are when we communicate. Again, building that awareness of how we communicate so we're confident to communicate what we're thinking. So I thought we'd just start off with an example, just to get everyone on the same page with their understanding. So you might have been in a similar situation, all as side leaders. So A young adult arrives to a Sai event and they're not wearing appropriate clothes to the event. So they've come in shorts and a singlet. We'll just go to the next slide. So they've come in shorts and a singlet, and you might try to get them aware of how we can get them aware to wear modest clothing in 4 different ways. So the first one might be a probe. So you say, Saram bro, did you know that we usually wear modest clothing to Sai events, like long pants and a shirt? And for all you know, that young adult might have actually not known. And he goes, oh, really? Thanks for letting me know. I'll for sure next event, or if I can find anything, I'll wear it now. But you can see you're just probing to get the information to them. If they come to if they hear the probe and they go, oh, okay, yeah, thanks, yeah, sure. They come to the next side event in shorts and singlet again. And as a leader, it's sort of your responsibility to let them know. And you're sort of going to an alert now. So, Saram bro, I think it'd be really good if you were to wear something else, like long pants and a shirt, instead of shorts and a singlet. So you can see you're alerting them to what you're trying to communicate. They're still not getting the ideas. We'll get to the next slide. So we're going to it's a bit of a challenge now. Did you know Swami has placed a lot of emphasis on wearing modest and non-revealing clothing to Sai events? So it would be best for you to wear long pants and a shirt. Still not getting it, and you have to become a lot more assertive now. So unfortunately, bro, if you persistently ignore the need to wear appropriate clothing, we will need to let the region president know, as it is disrespectful to Swami's teachings and also a distraction to those around you. Now, this may not be the case in every situation. This is just so that you can understand what the assertiveness is and how it can vary when we're communicating with people. So you can imagine if you were to go straight to a young adult who came to a Sai event, who's never been before or has been on and off, they're wearing shorts and a singlet, you go straight up to them and go, unfortunately, bro, if you persistently ignore the need to wear appropriate clothing, we will need to let the region president know. And, you know, it's disrespectful to Swami's teachings and a distraction to those around you. If you went up to someone and went, just go gung-ho and said that, I mean, of course, if that person didn't know any better, we've been way too assertive, and potentially that young adult's not going to come back. They're going to be offended, going to be hurt, all because we didn't take the time to actually go through the assertiveness, probe, find out, did they actually know any different? Or are they just trying to not do what's recommended? So that's how the graded assertiveness model works. Just an example. I'm going to give you a scenario now from my own life for everyone to see how this happened in real life. So when I was a center young adult coordinator, we were all preparing for Swami's birthday, and the young adult bhajan coordinator, we'll call him Shiva at the time, was a very assertive character. His communication style was quite the driver. So Shiva asked everyone for bhajans, and one of the other young adults, let's say his name was Prabhu, he gave a Ganesh bhajan. Prabhu didn't know many bhajans, and we rarely got to hear him sing, so we were really, really happy that he was getting involved. So in preparation for Swami's birthday, as we do, Shiva organized a bhajan practice. At the bhajan practice, Prabhu sang his bhajan in the style he knew it, and this wasn't the style that Shiva knew it as. As Shiva was a real driver style, he very assertively let Prabhu know that the bhajan can't be sung like that, and he needs to learn it the way that it should be sung, or that's it. He needs to find another bhajan, or he just doesn't get the opportunity to sing. Prabhu was quite hurt with how he was spoken to, obviously, and this information came back to me as the center young adult coordinator. When I heard what had happened, I was actually quite upset. Prabhu was a young adult that we wanted to give an opportunity to, and because Shiva was so abrupt and unaccommodating, Prabhu could be turned off Sai events, and all these thoughts started swimming through my mind. I could feel my heart racing slightly, getting agitated. And what was I going to say to Shiva? That was my responsibility as well. Was I going to just tell Shiva what he did was wrong? How do I make him understand that he shouldn't have communicated like that? And how do I communicate with Prabhu to say, hey Prabhu, don't worry about what's going on, you can sing, or how do I make sure that he's not disheartened with the whole experience? So if you are in this situation, I'd like to ask everyone to think about the graded assertiveness model. if I'm talking to Shiva, so Shiva is the bhajan coordinator who was really assertive and potentially offended Prabhu, what might be a way that I could have probed to explain to him what might not have been quite right about how he handled the situation? So we're thinking about a probe for Shiva, who's maybe being a bit too assertive with Prabhu. So feel free to type in the chat box what you think might have been a good probe. And after that, we'll move on to the alert and the challenge and the emergency, just to see within yourselves how you're thinking, how assertive and how different those different methods can be. Does anyone have any examples of a probe? So okay. So we've got some suggestions of how assertive we might be when we're communicating with them, but with Shiva himself, awesome. So a probe. Yeah, perfect. So we might go up to Shiva and say, hey, bro, did you know that Prabhu is not actually a very confident singer? Maybe we can allow him some leniency with the bhajan. Yeah. Yeah, awesome. So as Sai leaders, we have to always bear in mind that when we want to correct someone, it has to be done with love and not authoritative. Awesome. You can still get the message across without displaying strong authority. That's exactly right. So the example that Abina has given is actually quite loving. We're trying to understand and get to a good balanced place with how the whole situation has happened so that everyone is happy with the outcome. So we might go through some examples of that. So with the probe, like it might be, do you think we might be able to give some leniency with the bhajan? With the alert, it might be a matter of actually letting Shiva know that he could have managed the situation a little bit different. If he still says, oh no, he's such a bad singer, like this is unbelievable, Swami wants discipline and he wants it to be exactly as it is, and we're trying to manage Prabhu's emotions there as well, we might have to challenge that a little bit. Of course, always very lovingly, we say, bro, but Swami has also said bhava is just as important as raga and tala, so how do we get a balance of all three of them? And then if he still doesn't get it, then as the center young adult coordinator, you might have to sort of be a little bit more assertive, which is, Saram Shiva, I know that you're really, really passionate about it, but unfortunately, we have to give Prabhu the opportunity in this situation. Yes, I've got a few more examples there. So, would you think with the limited repertoire of bhajans that Prabhu knows, could you try to correct him? Yeah. Spend some time to practice the bhajan with him. Sister Dalashka, Prabhu's first time singing, so he may need some help with the bhajan. Be helpful to him by giving loving feedback. Yeah, awesome. So being really, really aware of how we communicate is so important. And as you can see, I hope, or hopefully you guys are seeing, that knowing how assertive you are on this graded assertiveness model can really mean a situation goes really well or doesn't go well at all. So if I was to go to Shiva and say, hey Shiva, what you did is just really bad, bro. That's not acceptable. Prabhu's going to sing the bhajan he's going to sing, and you really need to get over it. That's way too assertive, because for all we know, Shiva didn't know. And he wanted to just he wanted to do the best for Swami, and he felt that this was the best way to do it. Similarly with Prabhu, trying to find out from him whether, like, what he was feeling. If we were to probe and say, hey Prabhu, have you tried this bhajan in a different way? Or alerting him and saying, Prabhu, this bhajan is actually sung like this. Do you mind trying it like this? And then if it's a challenge, you'd be like, it'd be a really good idea, bro, if you were able to learn this version. And again, unlikely, but if you were to go to emergency, it's like, Prabhu, we're really strict on discipline. You have to learn it this way. And you can see, even in just those four, they're so different. We're effectively trying to get the same message across, but in four very, very, very different ways. So Again, why are we going through this? How does this have anything to do with confidence to communicate? Because being aware of how you communicate and how assertive you are when you're communicating will mean, if you are completely comfortable with it, will give you the confidence to communicate. If you're in a situation where you're, oh, I'm not sure whether I need to be really assertive or whether I can, hold back I can just put on the brakes a little bit and try to probe, unless you're really comfortable with that, you might be lacking the confidence to communicate. So again, being aware of your communication style is so important. We'll move on from the graded assertiveness model, and we're going to go on to the third part of our self-awareness. And that is being aware of your mind and your thoughts when you're actually communicating. We spoke a lot about how our mind might be swirling with thoughts and where fear of judgment and all these sorts of things at the beginning, what that person's going to assume. But is that clear thinking? Are we able to objectively see what our thoughts are so that we confidently communicate them? We're in so many situations. It might be at a Psi event. It might be at work. Someone's talking during a speech when one of your colleagues is speaking. How do you communicate with them? You think, oh, if I tell them to stop talking to me, they might judge me. People are making fun of someone else in a study circle. People are lying to others, and it's not the truth. There are so many situations where you have to communicate, and all these thoughts start swimming through your mind, monkey mind. But how can we ensure that we have an open and clear mind when we communicate? And always the best place to go is, what does Swami say? Swami says, cleanse your emotions, passions, impulses, attitudes, and reactions. That is the essence of spiritual discipline as laid down in all faiths. Examine your mind, your thoughts. Do not seek the fault-ridden person. See only purity. Speak ill of none. And if you slip into slander, repent and resolve. Not give vent to the habit another time. Do not humiliate anyone. Respect him for good in him. So Swami is so clear here on the idea of having an open and clear mind. Cleanse your emotions, your impulses, your reactions. Examine your mind and your thoughts. And do not humiliate anyone. Respect him for the good in him. So we've been talking about, communication and all of these models and things like that. But if our mind is not clear, how are we actually going to confidently articulate what we are thinking? So it's so important, this idea of self-awareness. So just to recap those three parts of self-awareness, the first is to know your communication style. We'll just go to the next slide. So to first know your communication style, think about how assertive you are when you are communicating and work out whether you really do need to be extremely assertive, or maybe you might be able to probe. And finally, be aware of what you're thinking. Have a really open and clear mind when you communicate, so you're able to articulate your thoughts confidently. So we've been talking a lot about communication and trying to get the point across to understand what we have control over so that we can make the person understand or see what we're thinking. But what happens if when you communicate, we aren't able to communicate what we are thinking properly, that you aren't actually able to achieve your desired outcome? So we'll go to the next slide. Every conversation or form of communication doesn't necessarily end in your desired outcome. So how do we manage our expectations of a situation when we want to go in and say something, but they're just not hearing it? Or you have a view, like you want the color theme for Swami's birthday to be orange and yellow, but someone else, the devotional coordinator, wants it to be blue and pink. How if you go really high and say, no, orange and yellow, Swami's robe was orange and yellow is the sun, it has to be this. The other person say, no, but blue and pink, that's all over the cool and tall. If you aren't able to get the color theme for that event, orange and yellow, does that mean that you've failed? Does that mean that, You should lose the confidence in your communication. Oh, I didn't get the color theme I wanted, so I'm so bad at this. What am I even doing here? It might seem like a silly example, but in many situations, whatever we're trying to communicate, sometimes we actually don't get the outcome that we want. As Sai leaders, whether it's at the center, the region, national, zonal, international, everyone's got the best intentions at heart. And we all want to do different things at whatever level it is, but sometimes we have to agree to disagree. Swami says we don't always have to oblige, but we can always speak obligingly. And Swami, as Krishna, explained this same idea of desireless action in the Bhagavad Gita, the idea of nishkama karma. He said, maybe not exactly like this, but generally, do your best without expectation of the outcome. So in my example, my accounting interview example, with my partner, I should be clear and pure in what I was going to say. And say I got fired. I said, I don't want to do my CA and I actually want to do dentistry. If he turned around and said, okay, you're fired, do I have the faith that I'm doing my dharma, that I've communicated with confidence, with purity of thought, word, and deed, and have surrendered such that this outcome is merely an outcome, that I have the confidence that Swami has got my back. Sister Sharanya did an awesome session about being loving in difficult situations, and she spoke about the idea of resolving our triggers and buttons. Sometimes one of these buttons can be, I always have to be right. I always have to have the last say. But how can we be in any situation and aware that, hey, actually maybe I'm not going to be able to win, in inverted commas, or communicate what I'm thinking? So I'll give you a personal example. So my wife and I moved into a new home and we needed to get a new couch for the living area. She wanted a lighter shade and I wanted a darker shade. Either of us could have been really assertive, thinking about this assertive model, gone straight to emergency or escalated and said, I want the dark couch and that's it. It's the better color, that's it, no more questions. But obviously I was a bit smarter. I tried probing. I said, don't you think the dark couch will look better with the cushions? Oh, no, not really. Now I went alert. So the dark color, it'll get less stains. If you've got a light couch, as most people say, if you've got a light couch, you're going to get lots of stains. But just nothing, no budging. That was it. We were going to get the light couch. And in the end, we got the lighter color couch. And Swami says, wife always has to be happy. No, he doesn't. But just because we didn't get the darker couch and didn't get my preference, doesn't mean I don't know how to communicate, or that I shouldn't bother trying to communicate with her next time. Oh, I'm never going to get what I want, so what's the point? This is just a waste of time. No. It's important to not avoid open communication because you think that you're going to be wrong or that you can't do it. The next situation is a new situation. And every time that we communicate is an opportunity to learn. Whether we are able to communicate what we're thinking or not. Just the next slide. It's not the outcome that defines success. We shouldn't lose confidence in our communication, our ability to communicate, just because we didn't achieve what we thought should be the outcome. The message here is that if we want to confidently communicate, we have to learn from every time that we've been in a situation like that and soldier on as Swami's ambassadors, because ultimately there's nothing to fear, like Swami has said, when we have that real confidence that Swami is going to look after us or has our back. So this is a good segue into the next or final objective. It's the question of who are you actually communicating with? Do you believe the person you are talking to is truly a reflection of yourself? That you can talk with that much love because you are talking to none other than a reflection. When speaking to the pink twins, represent from Australia, Swami said, no matter how difficult the situation, if you put enough love into it, things will turn out right in the end. How do we cultivate that love? We can ask Swami for strength before communicating, but we need to believe and practice the idea of non-duality, that idea of, are we actually this body? Do we believe we are reflections of each other? Some might say, oh, that's too fluffy. Come on, if I'm at work, that person has no idea what I'm talking about. Well, actually, it's not anything to do with what that person thinks about. It's what you think about. It's what you believe. So the next time someone might say, you have to give feedback and go, you are honestly one of the worst people I've ever met. I can't believe you did that. You should try saying it in front of a mirror and see how you feel, because that is most likely what the other person is feeling. And do we have enough confidence in Swami's teachings, in our true selves, to feel that we are communicating with none other than our reflection? Sure, we're going to slip up. We might accidentally be too assertive, or we might get agitated. We might feel our blood racing and that we're sweating. But have we actually put in the effort to even be a little bit aware, a bit aware, so we can get out of that state quicker and realize, hey, click out of it. This is just the mind. I have the confidence that I'm speaking with love and dharma, and I have no control over the outcome. That I have that surrender. We're not necessarily physically reflections of each other, but ultimately, that's the truth that Swami keeps talking to us about. We spoke earlier about becoming aware of our communication styles in order to cultivate the confidence to communicate. Similarly, we must spend the time to become aware of the truth that Swami repeatedly spoke to us about in order to become confident of that truth. Do we have the confidence in our true self? Because if we do, then we'll have the confidence to communicate in any situation, because our communication is grounded in truth. And what Swami says, just go as the same quote as before. When you forget yourself, when you forget the Atma, you will suffer from fear. When you remember only the world and not God, you will suffer from fear. When you are filled with desires and attachments, you will suffer from fear. When you are deluded by objects, you will suffer from fear. Coming back to my accounting example again with my partner, I shouldn't have been attached to the outcome. It doesn't matter if I'm talking to a work person, a friend, a family member, a Sai devotee, because I need to have the confidence in the self that I am and ultimately that they are. And this will give us the confidence to communicate. So those are all the main points for today. And just as the summary, we've got here, we spoke about the barriers. We started off with the barriers to communication. So we were talking about what stops us from communicating. We sort of identified that idea of fear, that there's some sort of underlying fear, whether it's of judgment, the assumptions, what the outcome is going to be, and looking at the things that I have control over. So do I need to change what I'm saying? Maybe how I'm going to say it, or even how I feel when I'm saying it. Is there going to be a better situation to say it in? It's important not to make assumptions. We looked at that, and to have an open and clear mind and know what you have control over. But you don't always have to oblige, but you can always speak obligingly. So really being aware, become aware of your communication style, how assertive you are, and how to articulate your thoughts. Again, that idea of having a clear mind. If you feel like what you are going to share needs to be shared, is there an acceptable level of assertiveness given the situation? And in your heart, you feel equanimous, like Brother Arvind did in his talk about the equation. Do you feel equanimous in everything that you're saying and how you're feeling? And do you have the confidence to leave the fruits of that communication to Swami, knowing that you can't change the response? It doesn't mean that you just go, oh, I'm going to say whatever I'm going to say, and it doesn't matter what they think. Nishkama karma, I've surrendered everything. But you take a step back. Have you actually taken the time to think about what you're saying, how you're saying it, how you feel when you're saying it, all the situation. It's important to not just throw this blanket rule over the situation, but really be honest with ourselves and aware. And finally, the idea of who we are actually communicating with. We can use lots of these handy tools and tips when communicating, but ultimately, having the confidence in the truth that Swami keeps telling us, that we are all manifestations of the same inherent divinity, cultivating that self-confidence will then allow you to have the confidence to communicate. All right, so that's basically all for today's YATD, and we have a bit of time for questions if anyone would like to ask anything. So we have gone through quite a few things, but we'll give everyone a bit of time to see if they would like to ask any questions. Yeah, beautiful quote. So you cannot always oblige, but you can always speak obligingly. That's what Swami said. And so important for communication. Right, so we've got a few questions here. So the first one is, Saram, brother. Interesting you should say Sathya, that's my brother's name. I struggle with communicating with people in general. I'm not sure if it's my tone or my body expression, but people just don't take me seriously when I speak. That's really interesting. With the idea that we spoke about of self-awareness, because you did say there, I'm not sure if it's my tone or my body expression, but people just don't take me seriously. What I would suggest is maybe talking to someone that you're quite close to, that you really trust and value their thoughts on yourself as an individual, and genuinely ask them when you're talking or your body expression, whether there is something that you might be able to improve. So whether it's your communication style, sometimes if we're really expressive or amiable, we're unable to assertively say our thoughts, and we have to cultivate that ability to do that as well. Similarly, maybe we're always probing and we're never really alerting or challenging, and that's something that we need to lovingly cultivate as well. So trying to cultivate that awareness of the actual communication styles, and what you're saying is probably what I'd suggest. So hopefully that makes sense. How to communicate with confidence in a stressful and overwhelming situation where we fear to respond back without doubting. Yeah, so coming back to the accounting example that I had, it was definitely, I felt like it was an overwhelming situation, and looking back on it, I feel like if I was able to believe that I had nothing to be afraid of. Swami keeps saying, why fear when I am here? He said, oh, yes, Swami says that, but I'm still really afraid. But we can't just say, yes, Swami says that. We have to believe. Swami says, why fear when I am here? If we really, really believe that, that should ideally give us, or it will give us the strength to communicate even in stressful and overwhelming situations, without having that fear of that response, and that doubt in ourselves, because ultimately we're doubting ourselves and our abilities, and we need to cultivate that confidence within ourselves before we'll be able to confidently communicate. How do you communicate with someone who abuses their authority? I guess that's maybe hard to know without the specifics. In those sorts of situations, if there is, I would say just from my limited understanding, but I'm sure there are other answers as well, trying to discuss with, again, someone that you trust, what the best way to actually communicate with that person is. But Swami has also said, I guess, with that communication is that sometimes it's better to sort of just say what we have to, but if it's still not getting through, then it's better to stay silent. I don't know exactly where that quote is, but I have definitely read it. And it can be really hard in those situations specifically. And I'm sorry I can't give you more specific of an answer, Durashka, but maybe we can talk about it offline more specifically. Sometimes you have to communicate with very strong personalities, with very strong opinions. Yeah, how do you handle that? So that can be, yeah, really, really hard and quite challenging. And I'm sure a lot of us have had to deal with or manage that. In my personal experience, that idea of nishkama karma, where you try your best, really your level best, you're being really loving, you're being actually quite assertive. Just because people are loving doesn't mean that they're a doormat, that they're being walked over. No way. You can still be lovingly assertive, and Swami is the best example of that. But sometimes in those difficult situations where people have really strong personalities, strong opinions, giving up, or not giving up, but surrendering what your expectation is of, or the outcome is, might be the best, best option, because nothing is going to change them. Literally nothing. Maybe prayer to Swami, that please, Swami, I really want the best for this, but this person is such a strong personality. They're just not listening to me. Swami's grace, ideally, will be able to fix that situation or resolve it. But for what we have control over, maybe we need to also let go of our expectation. It might not be the right time or the right place, and there's something to learn from that whole experience. So in regards to handling that, I think it sometimes can be like an internal thing as well, where you have to be comfortable within yourself to let go of the situation a little bit as well. When all others are communicating and effectively, and I will keep calm. Oh, yeah, I think myself as boring candidate. So if you're not, if I'm understanding the question properly, if you're not being very assertive or being very calm, you might be seen as boring. I don't think so. If you are able to effectively communicate what you're thinking, and you've said what you have to, it doesn't really matter if you're seen as the boring candidate, because the whole idea is that you want to share a thought or reach some sort of outcome. Even sitting silently, Swami has said, can be really important, unless you have to say something. He's got that think principle, and like, is it going to be hurtful? Is it necessary? Is it actually going to improve the situation? If you are able to tick all those things off, I don't think that necessarily it's a bad thing to be seen as a boring candidate in inverted commas. So we'll just keep moving, just in the interest of time. Sorry. If you're an expressive individual, how can you communicate your ideas with confidence when you get easily shut down? Should you be strongly opinionated, or should you just let it happen? Yeah, so again, that idea of, you might be really expressive, but are you able to potentially cultivate the driver within you, the more sort of assertive style of communication? Swami has said in an interview, when like he was, I said, when you show love to people but they take advantage of you, Swami said, just keep loving them anyway. It doesn't matter what they do. And this is really important in this situation, because on one side, it can be how you change yourself to try to communicate it more assertively. But on the other side, it can be, again, that idea of surrender, that you keep doing it the best that you can, and you keep being the best expressive individual that you can, and surrender it to Swami. Because if you feel like you're being easily shut down, and you want to improve that by being more of a driver, then you can. But if you're struggling to do that, then maybe it is something that you may have to just let happen, because there are going to be some really strongly opinionated people, but if you can maybe even go back to them with like probing and alerting and just teasing out of them what you are thinking, so they see what you are thinking, might be a handy way to actually get an outcome that you might desire. But again, that idea of surrendering the outcome, because it doesn't always necessarily end up in the way that you expect it. Hope that makes sense, Kieran. Communication is like an art, unique. Not anyone would love and understand our style. However, we should always strive for beauty of words, deeds, and actions. Yeah, that's a really beautiful sentiment. Next question was: is being too kind at the beginning of talk can be a wrong grade of assertiveness, or you just cannot be too kind to others in the state of love? Being too kind of being I don't think there's anything as being too kind. I guess the question I'd say is, can you ever be too loving as such? If you feel that, there's probably also again that awareness idea of, if you believe you're being meek or maybe like weak, not courageous in how you're talking, then that's quite different to being like too kind, I'd say. If you feel like you don't have the confidence to say what you're thinking, then we need to try to build that confidence. What within me, why am I lacking that confidence? Is it because I'm afraid of what they're going to say? Like, why am I being too kind? Is it that I don't want anyone to have any difficult conversations? It's normal to have difficult and open conversations. It's really healthy because it gives people different perspective, but it has to be done lovingly so that you're not feeling within yourself any of that anger and all of those vices that Swami talks about. So I don't think you can ever be too kind. And even if you started at a lower grade of assertiveness, there's no harm in becoming more assertive. And yeah, I think you can definitely slowly work it up in progression. I think it's harder the other way. If you go in too hard and you're not kind in a way and you're too assertive, it's harder to go back after that. So the last shikha: with Swami's guidance, prayers and help, can we communicate with confidence by thinking twice what to say? Is it right and necessary? And just keep Swami in your heart all the time through showing love and faith. Exactly right, sis. So true. So last question here. Dear Brother Sudhagar, do any bias influence your assertiveness in your decision making? Or how are you alerted, observant of any bias at different circumstances? Yeah, that's really good. So bias. When we think about bias, that sort of that idea of our expectations, what I want, what am I going to get out of this? So, like, I don't know. Say for example, at work, if you aren't to, in my situation, if I wanted to stay at the firm because I might not get into dentistry, didn't get all my past exams, there's some sort of bias there that, hey, actually I want to keep my job, so I better not tell them the full truth, because if I get fired and I don't get into dentistry, then I'm really nothing. I have no option. So in that case, there's still some sort of inherent expectation there, that there is some sort of that idea of bias in how assertive I am and in what my decision's going to be. I guess it might not necessarily be ideal because it's grounded in expectation, if that makes sense. I'm just going to, do any bias influence your assertiveness in your decision making? Because sometimes if you are biased and you really, really want something your way, then you can actually be over assertive. You're like, no, I want it this way, and so that's it. It's going to be like that, and everyone just has to get on board. I think when you reflect on yourself, and self-reflection is really, really important, on how you communicate in any circumstance, especially when you might have some bias, you'll see, I think you'll definitely see that that bias shouldn't have been one of the foundations for how you've communicated. And again, having open feedback and communication with others, people that you trust, to say, do you think I'm doing this the right way? To bounce ideas off and to make sure that you're doing it the best way that you can is really, really important of how we might be more observant or aware of the biases that we have in different circumstances. So hopefully that answers your question. Thank you everyone for joining the call. I really hope, thank you for sharing. So it's also important to remove the emotion from the communication. So like we were saying with Swami's quote, he says, get rid of those impulses, the attitudes, the reactions. And having that open and clear mind, because if we are clear in what we're thinking, then we'll be a lot more confident in how we're communicating. So thank you so much for sharing that. Once again, thank you everyone so much for making the time. Hope you've enjoyed it and you've got some pearls of wisdom from Swami's words. And love to you all. Saram.
Thank you so much, Brother Sudhagar, for this energetic and engaging workshop on how to communicate with confidence. Our next workshop will take place on January 26th with Brother Sayan of Canada, who will be presenting on vision and resilience. We recommend that if you have not already, to like the Sai Young Adults page on Facebook or Instagram to keep up to date with the latest on the workshops. Recordings of past workshops are available on the official SSIO YouTube channel with a playlist called SSIO Young Adults Talent Development Program. Let's close today's session with one Om and three Shantis. Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Jai Sai Ram.